Okay, so now we are all online, and everyone, welcome. Thank you very much for coming out for what will hopefully be a regular event. Today is July 9th, and this is the 56th anniversary of the first African-American ascent of Denali. And I'm really excited to be able to host this forum because, frankly, I think that it's kind of the culmination of a lot of really great ambitions to try to raise the awareness for the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion in access to the outdoors and in public land management. And before we get started, I want to, first of all, acknowledge that where I'm at right now at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I am on the ancestral homeland of the Ho-Chunk Nation in a land that was formerly called Dejope, which for time immemorial was the place of Native people. And wherever you are, I hope that you will also take the time to acknowledge, revere, and honor the Native people who first occupied your land. I'm going to get started very briefly by showing a short clip of the film that hopefully all of you had the opportunity to see. It is called An American Ascent, and it is the story of the first African-American ascent, the first all-African-American team ascent of Denali. And I'm going to share with you the vision behind this expedition. If my fellow panelists will all turn off their microphones, we'll be able to hear and watch this short clip.
August 1963. Martin Luther King Jr. gives one of the most influential speeches of the 20th century at the March on Washington.
And I really think that that's an excellent place to begin the conversation. It was Charlie Crenshaw's first ascent of Denali in 1964 that began for many African Americans a original opportunity to be able to spend time in the outdoors in a very profound way. What's especially remarkable about Crenshaw's ascent was that it happened 7 days after the signing of the Civil Rights Amendment. And when we stop and think about what that means, a week prior to his having achieved this amazing summit, there were places in this country where Charlie Crenshaw couldn't vote. There are places where he couldn't live. There are things that he couldn't do as a person of color. And now, 56 years later, we have the opportunity to celebrate his accomplishments, but also to celebrate the accomplishments of my fellow panelists for this evening. I'm just going to quickly go around the room, and I want to introduce the folks on the call today. First of all, we have Aparna Rajagopal, Rosemary Saul, Scott Briscoe, Steve Shobe, and also Tyree Moore. I would like each of you to introduce yourselves and first of all, tell us briefly, tell us a little bit about yourselves and also tell us your role in the expedition. And actually, we're going to start with Aparna.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Aparna. I use she, hers pronouns. I'm calling you from ancestral Kalapuya land in a place that's now called Eugene, Oregon. I've had the privilege of knowing the other folks you see on the screen for, 8+ years. I'm just real happy to be here. My role in the expedition was really just being the sort of operations person and the person that helped convene this group to make this happen. At the time, I was working for the National Outdoor Leadership School, or NOLS, in Lander, Wyoming. And I moved on from that place and that time, and I don't really need to talk anymore about myself because this is not about me. This is about all of you.
Aparna, thank you. And I think that's really important. We'll actually get to this in a little bit more detail in a bit. Expedition Denali was actually Aparna's idea. And she and I cooked this up late one night in the Lander bar in 2011. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we all got here. Next, I'd like to introduce to you the second youngest member of the team, Rosemary Saul.
Hey, y'all. Thank you, James. Thank you very much. And Aparna, we're here for you, too. We know the love you. We're here for you, too. My name is Rosemary Saul. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am joining this call today from the ancestral lands of the Tachiyokuts, which is located in the San Joaquin Valley, a town now called Los Baños, California. And yeah, let me see. My role on this team, once I was first put into connection with Aparna all those years ago and introduced to everybody else, was to be a member who was fortunate enough to go on the mountain and to climb as a part of this team and to continue to stay involved with this team, with this conversation, and with this movement in the years since.
Awesome, Rosemary, thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Scott Briscoe. Scott.
Hey, thanks, James. Scott Briscoe, he, him pronouns. I'm on the traditional homelands of the Ohlone people in the Bay Area. And my role was member of the team, the climber. In addition to climbing in 2013, I've been interactive in giving presentations around the country in conjunction with the film.
Awesome. Scott, thank you very much. Now I'd like to introduce Tyree Moore.
Hey, hey, I'm Tyree. I'm calling from DC, and I was another climbing member. Sorry, I'm a little distracted. My dog's right here. Hold on, let me tell him to go. Yeah, I was another expedition mate, and I, just like Rosemary said, I was invited. I was heavily involved at one point with Knowles at the time, and that was my connection to the expedition. And, you know, I just sort of like she said, my role kind of extended beyond the climb itself and even brought me here to this call today was just to kind of continue the work beyond the actual climb itself, but to also continue to spread, you know, this type of exposure and these type of moments and time out to the community and just kind of continue to inspire stories like this. And so I'm happy to be here. I'm really glad to, you know, get to see some of you all again. It's been a while. So I'm happy to kind of share this moment with y'all. Sometimes we do this alone, so it's good to kind of be with the group again. So, hey.
Awesome. And finally, I'd like to introduce Stephen Show.
Hey, can everybody hear me? Yeah. Well, my name is Stephen. I'm 64 years old, to tell you the truth. Yeah, I started climbing a while back and was asked to participate in Expedition Denali at one of its infantile stages. And like everybody else in the group, what are you laughing at? like everybody else in the group, you know, I was very interested in what was going to happen after the climb in terms of sharing our experiences and getting people interested in participating in non-traditional activities in the outdoors. To this date, you know, I'm still climbing as much as I can, although, you know, I'm working. So thanks a lot, James, for inviting me. Appreciate it, and looking forward to answering some questions.
Awesome. Well, hopefully, many people, in fact, we had over 750, almost 800 people registered to get the access code to watch the film. I think people have been dialing in from all over the country. You'll notice in the pull-down menu on the right side of your screen, there is a chat window for Q&A. And we actually have quite a few questions that have already come in, but I'd like to invite the audience to share with us what their questions are for the team. And I'd like to begin, first of all, by asking everyone just the very basic general question. And just in the interest of you know, making sure we don't talk over one another, if I need you to raise your hand if you'd like to make a point. But I'm very curious to know, can each of you tell me what you've been doing since the expedition began? What has been your life? Who wants to go first?
Hello, I'll go first.
Yeah, there you go. You're online.
Okay. Anyway, no, since the you're just laughing. Since the expedition, you know, I've actually, like I said before in the beginning, have traveled extensively to some of the screenings and had the opportunity to share my experiences with the climb itself, and some of the things that I've done since then. I've continued to work on being one of the 7 summit climbers, although to date, the thought of Everest is kind of waning away, and I'm working more towards doing Vincent. So I think I'd be happy with the 6 summits, with the Vincent under my heel, because it's kind of flat. My knees don't want to do what they used to do. I have a couple of businesses. I've kind of shifted from rock to climbing steel. I do, I have a tower climbing business, so I climb towers and put up antennas and whatnot. Other than that, I came back to spend more time to raise the family. I've got 3 adult children now, and everybody seems to be happy, or everybody is happy. I'm a grandfather now. I've got a 15-month-old grandson. Everybody's healthy, moving forward in life, and basically that's all I could ask for. Sometime in the near future, I'm thinking about maybe retiring and then spending more time, back in the outdoors. But like everything else, got to make that buck.
Awesome. So who'd like to go next? How about Scott? Scott Briscoe, what have you been up to?
Yeah, so gosh, Expedition Denali really catapulted me into where I am today. And the progression of that was, as I had said earlier, was really being active in giving presentations, in going around the country and showing equipment that was actually on part of the climb, to predominantly audiences of color and predominantly youth. And I started working very kind of intentionally with organizations and companies, trying to figure out strategies, and whether it was the American Alpine Club in figuring out, the methods in which to increase their membership diversity, or whether it was with Patagonia and trying to figure out some of the challenges that they're faced with systemic racism. To this day, I founded We Got Next, and it's really interesting because We Got Next is actually, or Expedition Denali was actually the genesis or the structure for We Got Next. I found that there was such inspiration in myself, but also in the audiences that I shared the story with, that I wanted to amplify those individual stories of underrepresented communities. So that's what We Got Next does. It's a nonprofit that takes 10 ambassadors, puts them on an expedition or project, and then puts them on a tour around the country to share their story.
Well, I think in many ways very much like Expedition Denali. I think that's awesome. Tyree, why don't you share with us what you've been doing?
Yeah, so sort of like Scott said, this expedition really it was like very a pivotal moment in my life that kind of just gave me a platform. It just kind of showed, like, prior to this climb, I really enjoyed being outdoors and being in nature, but for very personal reasons. And just being around so many influential people like Shob and Scott, and so many people had like been in the space much longer than I had been in, and been a part of an expedition that wanted to just do something beyond ourselves, really kind of inspired me to really take this moment and kind of make the most of it. And so from there, I did have some more selfish moments coming out of that. I did a lot of traveling, a lot of personal mountaineering. After Denali, I just kind of really wanted to continue to be on big mountains. So for like the next 2 years, I had traveled around the world and really taken advantage of some really great climbs. But that was kind of short-lived for me. I wanted to really kind of continue to just recreate experiences that I had up on Denali. And so that kind of brought me back home to DC. And so I started working back for City Kids and working with youth in the city to get outdoors, but just wanted to expand my reach. And that's kind of what led me to starting Soul Track Outdoors, because I just felt like there was so many people that could really either benefit from these spaces or already in these spaces, but were seeking community. I know when I first came back to DC, it was really hard for me to kind of really connect or find that sense of community in a way, or connect even people who I had already identified as community, and just wanted to like give them space in nature. And so just wanting to start that and just really create these experiences that I had been having for the like years prior to being back in DC. And so that's kind of where I ended up and where I am now. And so, like I said, it kind of all started with my experience up on Denali with everyone here in the chat. So, yeah.
Awesome. So, Rosemary, what have you been up to since the expedition?
Well, I'll start. Let me be another voice to add that Expedition Denali was also a hugely profound and transformative experience for me as well, and also played a huge role, I would say, into where I have been since then and what I'm doing now. And so since that climb, that also, while like similar to these folks, was already involved in spending time in outdoor spaces and adventuring and becoming more connected to the world around me, that really Expedition Denali got me more focused on that passion and realizing that this is just something that I loved so much, and connections like with these wild spaces that were so valuable and formative for me. And so I have mostly continued the relationship that I began with Knowles, or that had been involved with Knowles in that expedition, and began my career of working in outdoor education. I spent some time kind of chilling for a little bit afterwards also, like didn't quite travel as much of the world, but doing my own adventures, working, going back to school. And then since then, joined with Knowles, took my instructor course a few years ago in 2016, and have been largely working as an outdoor educator since then. So working backpacking, and recently began working mountaineering courses as an instructor over the past couple of years. And then that starting in that profession with that organization has led me to connecting with so many other groups of people and communities and organizations, has allowed me to work with students from all over the world, and just ultimately continue this message that was born of Expedition Denali, of expanding just what it looks like to be an outdoor enthusiast, or what it means to spend time in the outdoors and to adventure in nature. And so that has been largely what I have been doing, and I'm still doing. And then I'm still kind of figuring out what is next in the world, but I'm really just enjoying being able to spend time in so many beautiful places.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. I'd like to turn it over to Aparna briefly, or at least because I know she's very modest about her role in Expedition Denali, but it's really important that we recognize the fact that it was her idea. And I would love it, Aparna, if you can kind of take us back to 2011 when you and I first met. What was going on with the National Outdoor Leadership School, the outdoor industry in general? Why was an event like Expedition Denali necessary to begin?
So back in 2011, when we met, so long ago, and I think that the reasons for me for supporting this vision, which was, I will say, not just me, there was a colleague of mine, Marcio Paz Barreto, who worked at Knowles as well, who came up to me and said, we have this permit to climb Denali, and we noticed, and I think you maybe mentioned, James, that the 100th anniversary was coming up, and there was this sort of vision that came about. And I think a lot of it was because I was a diversity and inclusion manager at an outdoor education organization. So I was like one of the few brown faces in the building, and they're like, hey, do diversity work. It happens to a lot of us. I loved the work, but I didn't feel like, Shelton Johnson, who's the narrator of the film, often mentions that you need seismic change. And I don't think that anything I was doing at that school was creating seismic change. And I was like, I want something big. I want something big that can create, or at least spark a conversation about something deeper than just like hiring more people of color. And so that was what prompted it. I think if I had to do it all over again, the reasons that I did it are not the reasons I would do it now. Because I think for me, my mind, I've evolved, and it's not just about representation anymore for me. It's about justice. It's about equity. That's the work I do. I run an organization that supports outdoor and environmental organizations with centering justice and equity in everything they do. And it's not just about diversity. It's not just about like window dressing or tokenism. And so I think that the reasons I would do it would be different, but I still would do it. And I think that, that's really what came up for me, was like we had this opportunity to convene a group of people to do this thing, and then it took off. And someone in the chat box was mentioning us laughing and smiling, and it's because like these folks are like family. I mean, we hung out at my family's house. We hung out in Alaska with my kid, who's now taller than me, and we it's like a little bit of a reunion here. So if you're seeing us smiling and laughing, it's because we really miss each other.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it looks like Stephen DeBerry happened to just drop on the line. Stephen, are you there? Did I tell you?
Can you hear me?
There you are. I can hear you and see you. Hey, welcome, man.
Okay,
I didn't get a chance to introduce Stephen before, but I'll introduce him now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Stephen DeBerry, another expedition member. Introduce yourself, Stephen, and tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. Sorry, there was a technical snafu. So my name's Stephen DeBerry. I was a member of the expedition team. I was a chief cook and bottle washer, and I'm really glad to be here. It's just, I heard what Aparna was saying at the end about why everyone is smiling so much, and it's happening to me too. I love these people, you know? It's great.
Yeah. Awesome, thank you. And also, I wanted to make sure that we get an idea as to what everybody has been doing since the expedition. What have you been up to?
Mostly being a dad. I mean, my two daughters were 3 and 4 years old, when we were up on the mountain, and they're 10 and 11 now, 2 girls. Oh, wow. And so the most important thing is being a dad to them. And I also continue to run my investment firm, which is doing, different versions of the same kind of work that we were climbing for, which was about, extending the reach of diversity and helping the world understand its benefits. So yeah, just, being a dad, working hard, try to be a constructive citizen and trusted friend.
Awesome. Well, thanks. It's so good to see you. You and I haven't crossed paths in a very long time, so it's great to see you on camera. I also wanted to point out that Expedition Denali included several other members, namely Ryan Mitchell, Erica Wynn, Billy Long, and Adina Scott. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get everybody on the call today, but they're all doing well from what I've been made to understand, and hopefully we'll be able to reach out to them as well. Now, Aparna, you had mentioned a moment ago that the reasons that you did the expedition then are different than what you would do now. And I can tell you from my own perspective, I think my thinking on this has changed a bit. Because back then it was really just about representation. We wanted to see more people of color in magazines, in the movies, on ads and so forth. But I think we all know that it's significantly more than that. Can you frame up a conversation that we can all chime in on, and hopefully we'll get some questions from the audience? Tell us about environmental justice and social justice, and how is it currently being played out in outdoor recreation, and what can we do to perhaps change it? Big question, I know, but from your perspective, where does that come from?
I mean, I think for me, the point of the expedition, and I don't have any regrets. Someone asked if we have regrets, and I was not on the mountain, just to be clear. I was at base camp with my 5-year-old, hanging out while everyone else was on the mountain, taking updates from them on my voicemail and writing little blog posts, because people read blogs back then. There was no Instagram. I would say that when you ask about justice work, I think more and more I'm trying to connect the dots between outdoor and recreation, specifically like public lands, recreation, and conservation and justice for a lot of reasons. I think it's not just that there's a lack of access for people to these lands that are public lands, right? There's so many other dots we don't connect. We don't think about the history and all the efforts that go toward outdoor recreation and conservation now are done in the wake of this history that has been really oppressive and exclusionary of Black and Indigenous and people of color. And we don't learn this history in the schools. We learn, I just learned a few years ago, right? The Civil Rights Act and the Wilderness Act were passed the same year. And so what does that say about who was at the table during this really important conservation legislation? Who had rights to even vote at the time, to even exist at the time? Who could own land at the time? Whose lands were being taken at the time? Who was not considered human at the time? I mean, that is really, for me, the reason I do this work now, is to continue to explore the way in which justice needs to be centered in this work. We need to reflect on this history so that we can create a more equitable outdoor movement. And then for environmental, when you talk about environmental justice, I think that we need to continue to connect the dots between conserving these big, large, quote unquote, remote landscapes and like everyday impacts that the environment is having to brown and black and for communities. And I think some companies are doing that work of connecting those dots. Like for some people, environment means not having clean air, not having clean water, and not like being able to access like a place where we can see like moose and other things. So I think that's another thing I'm trying to do is connect those dots. And a lot of that was not on my mind, I'll say, in 2011 and 12 when we were doing this work.
Awesome. Have any of you, the rest of you, given this particular issue some thought? How has your thinking changed in the last 7 years? Is there anything appreciably different now in terms of how you're approaching this work or your thinking around diversity, equity, inclusion when it comes to the outdoors? Who'd like to share? Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, some of the big changes that have occurred to me is for so long, things were separate. I had things very separated and categorical. I had my activism life, I had my adventure life, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that most of the people I was in white dominant spaces. So I never really was able to, I never felt elevated to engage in that kind of activist, like marry the two together. And I think that what's happened for me is that they become one and the same. And I think in that process of coupling those two, I have found that I also want to redefine what outdoors is, because for many of us, particularly someone who has grown up with adventure as part of my environment and my life and my perspective, I think of climbing mountains, I think of kayaking down the rivers, I think of, fly fishing. But I think if we're able to redefine what outdoors is to be just as a term more inclusive, then there's a chance that we can just kind of organically, naturally be more inclusive in terms of people. And that's something that has shifted for me over the years as well.
Okay. Tyree, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say that coming out of this expedition, especially coming into like the Instagram age and social media and everything, I think initially a lot of my activism or way of like exposing communities to these spaces for me was very visual or media focused, and even through like expedition like this and being filmed. But as I kind of got older, and like Scott was saying, I was in a lot of white spaces while I was having a lot of these really powerful experiences, as well as like, again, being in a space where that was like my immediate way to connect with communities that weren't there. As I kind of got older and kind of wasn't being as rewarded by the experiences as I once was, I felt like I needed to be more directly engaged in my activism, because I started to feel very disconnected from my own communities, that I thought that I was like, oh, like if I post a picture of me out in Jackson Hole, or if I post a picture of me in Alaska, that'll inspire people to get outdoors. But it very much became Tyree, the black dude that lives in DC that goes mountaineering, and less, of it being like this black guy in the outdoors. And that like I can do that, because in a lot of cases I was being supported for a lot of my expeditions or a lot of the different trips that I was on, so I couldn't even give true resources or like tips on how to actually make those things happen, because I couldn't even afford to be in those spaces on my own. And so it was still very unrealistic, even with me being there. And so the way that I approach it now is being like, to Scott's point, is that I do make things very relative to people's environment here in DC, because it is unrealistic for someone who has never even left the DMV to even expect to want to even be in a place like the New River Gorge or anywhere like beyond their immediate environment. Like, why not have them embrace the spaces that are close to them and love those places first? And if they do decide to go further out, then so be it. But I think that it was more important for me now to really just love and appreciate the things that are like more like within our reach, right? And like not have to have these very dramatic, like super scenic environments to really appreciate nature. Like that's like I love going to the park and like cooking out with my friends and like going fishing and like the local river. And I think that for me is just as rewarding. And it's not even more rewarding now than being, thousands of miles away, pushing send on a post and feeling like, oh, like I did my part. Just now I definitely enter this space and like try and take full advantage of the platform that I have much differently than I had, years ago. So just a much different approach now.
I love that. Rosemary, I'm really curious. I mean, you're actually working as a wilderness guide now. How are you addressing the interests of your own personal outdoor recreation lifestyle with inspiring young people to perhaps, follow you or, to be able to have a positive outdoor recreation experience closer to home?
That's a great question. This is definitely something, like, since coming from Expedition Denali was a formative experience in my relationship and this journey towards becoming an outdoor instructor. It is absolutely something that has sort of created like a lens with which, or through which that I view the work that I do. And so I just remember like at the beginning of, or earlier on in this career, like largely the demographics of students that I was working with didn't necessarily represent like myself or aspects of my identity or places that I have come from. And maybe folks who might not have been exposed to the conversation that we're having now of like why these conversations around equity and around justice, around diversity and representation are applicable in the outdoors. And so starting with that is just really being someone to show up and have these conversations, and especially in my role as an instructor, as being one of the people to contribute to the experience that these students are having and to shape that experience, just having these conversations, even if it is like having conversations about race, even if it's to a group of white students, or just like bringing in these different conversations, even if it's not necessarily represented in the group that I'm speaking to show that these things are, do play a role in where we are and why we're here, even if it's not something that is immediate and palpable and something that we're aware of. And because similar to what Aparna was saying, like there's so many things that I am learning about just the structure of so many of these systems that are in place that contribute to who does and who does not spend time in the outdoors. And there are just so many moving parts and so many pieces in history to that even though I knew that there was that disparity, I didn't necessarily know the details of it. So again, having those conversations, being open to learning, sharing that with students. And even, I'm not the most active on social media, but just even sharing that story, like just posting pictures of being in the wilderness, being in the backcountry. And I think even more so what will be part of the conversation is similar to what Tyree was talking about of like, the backcountry and wilderness experiences are not just far away in national forests and national parks. Like it's in the backyard, it's at your local lake and pond. Again, just like showing that, because I've heard from so many folks, whether it be cousins or friends from school or people that I've known in my life, that are like, oh my gosh, girl, like I'm living vicariously through you, through what I see online. And then it's like, oh my God, well, guess what? Like that could be you also. Like, let's get together, like let's go to the park, or like let's go on a camping trip, even if it's not super far from home. And always trying to be that person of like, oh, do you think this is cool? Like, great, like let's connect and let's like get out there together at some point. And then also, I think, and recently also just trying to be intentional about working with just like a wider demographic of students also, and still addressing these topics just with people of all backgrounds, and seeing how these systems that exist in the front country, like when we're at home, when we're at work, play a role in our wilderness experiences, and that those two things are not mutually exclusive and they're not separate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things we often forget, that, outside is literally outside your back door. Stephen DeBerry, I'm curious, as a dad, especially with, young girls that they were just babies when we were, together in Alaska. How are you communicating to them the lessons that you learned on the expedition, and, hopefully inspiring them to be, people who will not only enjoy the outdoors, but ultimately become advocates for it?
Yeah, I think the conversation that we're having relates to the experience that we're all having in this country right now. And that experience connects to at least two things. One that Aparna said, and I think this thread that, Scott and Rosemary touched on, and Tyree. So it struck me that Aparna just mentioned that the Wilderness Act and the Civil Rights Act were passed at essentially the same time. And so even if you don't know the details of either of those sets of policy, the big point is people were making rules about how the game was going to be played, right? And so I think that's important. And of course, to go into the detail of those policies, but even before you do that, just understanding that people are making rules to the game and rewriting those rules all the time. And then the other thing that we're talking about is that I think essentially everyone touched on is, including yourself, James, this notion of where's outside, where is nature, right? And having an understanding that, my girls just pitched a tent on our deck a few nights ago, which is, how I got started, in the backyard, and as far away as we could imagine, is as beautiful as right outside our doorstep. And not only that, but what we imagine as being natural isn't just the trees and the water and the birds and things I think most environmental activists sort of point to when you look at the images and the iconography and everything. I was joking the other day, I think we can all imagine the image of like the little sapling in the hands, like the images of the environmental movement. But environment is also our neighborhoods and our cities and our asphalt. And when you put those things together, understanding that people are making rules all the time, and that those rules affect our own imagination of what's natural, and our experience of the outdoors and in every manifestation, that's where the power is, understanding how to set those rules and to structure the game so that we can all play, and that everyone has a shot to win, and that it's joyful, And I think that's the conversation, we're having with our girls, and, it's inspiring. They're 10 and 11, and they're having very sophisticated conversations with their peers. And they are defenders of our environment and nature. And I think they're going to make really great decisions when it comes their turn to set the rules of the game,
So, Stephen Show, not to suggest that you've got long experience, but you've been at this longer than anybody.
Yeah, as I sit here and listen to these people articulate these well-crafted ideas as to where they think it's going and where it came from, everybody's laughing. I'm just and a few years ago I would never quantify myself as the old guy who tells the stories. But now I get to do it. And, the truth of the matter is I came into it, differently than everybody else did. It was just a part of my nature to be adventurous. So when I started rock climbing, it was just because it was an adventure. There was no hey, I'm going to be the first, rock climber to set routes that haven't been done before. It was just something that I wanted to do because I just wanted to do it. Now, it just morphed into, hey, look, I'm the only black guy doing this. How come more people aren't doing this? Because I'm having all this fun and nobody else is able to enjoy the things that I can enjoy. So it wasn't until I started the Pioneer Climbing Expedition, the 7 Summit program, that I actively started seeking out the ability to share the experience. And it was not a monumentous thing for me. It was just something that, was organic. It just happened. Teachers would ask me to come set up a tent and talk to kids about what it was like to be on a particular summit. And then, it got to be to the point where, well, hey, let's just do this. After I climb a summit, let's go and talk to kids. And I think I received more motivation from the kids that, I was able to share my experience with than anything else. And that was actually my driving force, was to come home and share this experience with people because it seemed to make people happy. And there were ebbs and flows in the whole process, but, unlike you well-articulated guys, who have all these, philosophical views about what's going on, I looked at it very simplistically. It's something that I like doing, and if I like doing it, then maybe other people can do it. Because, Steve DeBerry, right? He played football. Everybody has these things that they did that were great. Well, the feather in my hat was rock climbing and mountaineering. Those are the things that was my way and my contribution to be shared with people. And then on that note, I love you guys. You guys are the greatest group of people I've ever met in my entire life. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have experienced this with y'all, okay? But outside of that, I'm just a simple dude who likes to tell a simple story, and that's it.
And frankly, I think there's a lot to be said for that, because, there's that notion that we're doing this to prove a point, but there's also the aspect of we're doing this because it's fun, because we enjoy it, because we want to give pertinence and value to our lives, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But I think ultimately, especially when we're talking about trying to make it so that these environments are better for other people, we need to figure out exactly what we can do to make the outdoors more accessible to people who don't feel like they're welcome. And I think a program like Expedition Denali, a big part of what made it successful and why here we are still talking about it 7 years later, was because it really was a group of people who were just doing what they love to do, but they wanted to share that with others. And with that, I'd love it if we can get some questions from the audience. And I'm going to start off with a question from Stephanie, who asks, looking back on the expedition, are there any regrets? And how has that experience impacted your view on mountaineering and being Black in the outdoors? Can you give a little backdrop of what into the planning of the expedition and the funding and logistics? We'll talk about that in a second. But I'm pretty sure that no one on this panel has any regrets. And we talked about how things are indeed different. What do you think that the long-ranging impacts of mountaineering are by having a program like Expedition Denali? What does the outdoors look like now because of the imagery that you created in this project?
I think it's prolific. I think that I've talked to many of the participants in the climb, specifically Aparna, and the gratitude that I've shared with her in being kind of I call her the mama bear of this project. And something that she said was that and I think it's true. I think people are out there, right? People are doing their thing. And Billy Long said something. He said that he feels like us doing our climb, the whole project. First of all, let me say, when I talk about the expedition or the project, I think of it as a whole. I don't think of it as just the climb, right? It was this experience of bonding with each other several years before the climb, meeting at Aparna's house. It was the experience of mountaineering on Baker together. It was this bonding that we had gone through. That's part of it. Then there was the expedition, the climb. That was phenomenal. That was incredible, right? That was that was the energy that was fueling the whole project. And then there was going around the country and sharing our stories. So I think that the expedition, I think, is much bigger than just the climb. I think that Billy had said in terms of the optics and the visuals that it granted permission for folks. And I think that that's what we have seen kind of post an American Ascent. I think that folks were out there doing these things and loving it. There were climbers, there were adventurers, there were mountaineers, but to some degree, maybe they didn't feel as comfortable because they weren't seeing other people doing it. And I think it really provided, to use Billy's term, it really provided permission for folks to kind of jump out there and say, yes, I'm doing this too, and I can share that. Technology had a little bit to do with it as well, with social media. But I certainly feel like we had just, we've spoken as a group close to 30,000 people around the country since the film came out. I think that speaks volumes, Environmental film festivals. The movie screened in Ferguson, the White House, it has been around the country. It's to, colleges, universities, community centers. And I think that it has really provided a spark for folks of color to really feel that energy to get going into the outdoors.
No, and I totally agree. But oddly enough, though, for example, the film wasn't screened at Banff. It wasn't filmed. It screened at Mountain Film. A lot of people actually told me that, they didn't Summit. How is that an adventure story? What do you think about, perhaps the industry reception? Because it's remarkable that we're really talking about these things now, with George Floyd and everything that's happened very recently. The industry is really starting to roll out, their interest in these topics now. Why weren't we talking about this 7 years ago to the degree that we're talking about now? What's changed? What's different now that we can have these conversations where all these companies are making these definitive statements about diversity, equity, inclusion? What's different now relative to what it was like 7 years ago?
I think that it's cancel culture. I think that people are getting called out on much larger platforms, and so people have to show face because it's at this point it's a business model, right? I do think that it's again, social media does allow us to become more educated and be more knowledgeable of these issues. But I think, let's be very clear, a lot of this stuff isn't rocket science. I think that we should have already been doing our part for decades now, right? And so I think that unfortunately, I think people having the platforms, people of color having platforms that do hold a lot of credibility, through these social accounts, which is really crazy. We've become our own celebrity. We've developed these huge followings that do kind of hold stake in these communities now. And so that puts a lot of pressure on larger brands and companies to really take us seriously. I think that at that point, Expedition Denali was kind of a solo mission and kind of just could easily be pushed aside at one point. But now there's this huge charge of so many people. It's so impressive to watch, even just seeing, I learn about new groups and new people every day. And it's just so impressive to even see this huge force. It's just really strong and it's really powerful. And I think that not only, I'm not the only person that feels that. I feel like everyone is starting to feel that. Because even at some point I was having large conversations with huge brands about a lot of these things. And it was in question about is this is this a sustainable market? Are these people, and I know so many people that can purchase your little $200 coat. Let's not misperceive what, specifically Black people can afford or like prioritize for your brand or whatever those things are. But I think that now is becoming so much larger of a conversation, even around just like whether or not this is a sustainable market. But like, do we look equitable? Are we doing our part overall? Like, we can put so much focus into one or two things, but it's I think, like I said, I think that now there's a lot of pressure that I don't necessarily think was there before, because social media has allowed us to really tap into so many different communities and markets that will uplift and support these very substantial issues that are taking place in this field. And I don't think that was necessarily the case in 2013.
Yeah, Aparna, I'm really curious to know from you, what do you think is different now relative to what it was like 7 years ago?
I mean, I'll just echo what Tyree said. I think social media has been a very powerful movement, granting permission for people not just to like have their own brand and go outside and tell their own unique stories, but to actually push those in power in the industry to make real change. And it was the kind of change that we, as like a group of people walking the aisles of the Outdoor Retailer Show and talking to companies, could never really make happen. Like, it was a struggle in 2012 and 2013 fundraising for this, meeting with brands, flying everyone to Salt Lake City. And I think now, like, one social media influencer can put something out there and all the brands will listen. And I think that is, I'm just repeating what Tyree's saying, but I think that's yeah.
It's very true. Like I just want to, I remember, like, Outdoor Retailer was very intimidating. Like, it was like picking like thorns out of people's sides. And now it's just like, to be able to walk up to a brand and just say, like, hey, I want this from you, or like, could I work with you, seems so much more casual than it was back then. It was like people were avoiding us. And so I think that, like, legitimately, like you said, I think that it's so crazy now to even think that almost it's the reverse. Like, brands are like, how can we help you? Like, how can you work? How can we work with you? And so I just think that that's a result of just having now been able to like have platforms that, like, these communities have just like kind of been able to come together like they haven't been before. And we were, and not just us. I think that there were so many other people, like Show, so many, like, not so many years, but like long before Expedition Denali, but had been in these spaces, but not necessarily maybe having contact with other people to like come together and be this force that I think social media has allowed us to kind of develop.
Yeah, there's also one more thing that's changed. So since this expedition, there have been countless affinity spaces that have been created for Black and brown folks to go out and do the things they love. Not all of them were like this big media thing, but like I think Color the Crag was one of them.
Right.
Is one of them, and I supported the PGM1 conference, which is for people of color, Black and Indigenous people of color who work in the outdoor and environmental space, to get together. They're like 400 people, and we're in our 4th year now. There are more and more groups of people getting together who share these identities and like being able to inspire each other. And so they're the role models. It's like, it doesn't need to be like a team that's on like Fear magazine, which is like really heartening to me that we don't have to put the same amount of like effort issuing like 1,000 press releases to get the story heard, which is really what it took. Yeah.
I was just going to add, I think the brands are behaving this way because they realize that it's a matter of survival for them on some level. These are huge markets, and Shove, don't make fun of me, but I'm going to say some statistics. So just, if you look at the entire U.S. economy, it's $20 trillion. 70% of that is consumer spending. That's you, me, that's like gas, milk, tires, cable TV. It's like everyday people stuff. And so the math of it is we are everyday people. And in fact, we're most of the everyday people. You know what I mean? So it's actually a huge market. And I remember, folks were talking about when we were walking through Outdoor Retailer, and I remember talking to several brands and saying, I'm an entrepreneur. I was like, I want to build a brand. I want to build an outdoor brand. And they were like, well, we don't know how many people of color are really into outdoor sports. And I was like, yeah, but a lot of Black people get cold. Let's just sell jackets. like, it's not complicated. You know what I mean? And it's like, it takes time for the market to figure that out. And I think it's a matter of survival now because we do understand that. And to Aparna's point, people of color are starting to not only realize their power, but to come together. And so if they don't start putting us on the existing brands, they know that we're sophisticated enough to figure it out and just say, like, you cold? I'm cold. Oh, we're all cold. And there's like a jacket maker. Let's go build our own brand, you know? So unless they continue to make space for the people who are actually driving the industry by the numbers in increasing volume, then, you know, they're going to have to end up competing. And I don't think they want that.
You know, I got a question from what kind of policies, and we've been talking about social structures, what kind of policies do we want to see from government? You know, from the, either from state, federal, you know, municipalities around the country? What can we do from perhaps an administrative standpoint to improve diversity, equity, inclusion in the outdoors? What would you like to see?
Sorry, James, who was that question directed toward?
Anyone. I'm actually curious because frankly, you know, we're talking a lot about you know, the social space, but what about the geopolitical space? You know, what do we want to see from lawmakers? What do we want to see from elected officials?
I'd love to see elected officials expand. Right now, they're contracting public lands. They're privatizing public land. And I'd like to see that go the other way. I think we need to see more public lands, and there needs to be more funding to the Department of Interior to do outreach and make those lands available. And to the points that we were talking about earlier, those public lands should not just be in the furthest away places. They should be connected to our urban environments, and there should be funding to get people, you know, back and forth from urban to rural to, you know, backcountry, in my opinion.
Excellent point. Anyone else? Tyree?
Something I was going to add to that point, I think that one thing that is really prevalent here in DC is just implementing some sort of housing control around our local parks, because something that we see is like when these places are getting like modernized and really taken care of, a lot of these communities get pushed out. And like, for instance, the ones that are here, the Black communities that do exist here in DC, the parks are substantially under maintenance and under resourced compared to the ones that are in these gentrified neighborhoods. And so, that's almost like a signifier that those neighborhoods are going to start being gentrified once we start to see, you know, these parks being taken care of. I know that even here in DC, there's starting to be some planning around Anacostia Park, and they're thinking about introducing the rugby field and all of these things that does not necessarily match the community that exists there. And so it already kind of indicates that there is signs that this is going to be a much larger change beyond the park itself. And so I think that just when we are thinking about our parks and we are thinking about, especially locally, how, like, on a much larger scale, how else do we also protect and maintain that space from a residential aspect or community aspect? That is something I do really, really want to see here, like at least in urban spaces with our parks.
No, brilliant. Because frankly, gentrification is a big part of losing urban space that could potentially become free and open natural space. Anyone else have something to share on that? I think it's a good point of conversation.
I have two that I can think of. I think one is more about the process of managing these places. And I think there needs to be processes that involve community members around like what goes in a space, because there's stories around places like Houston doing these focus groups, like what they want in their public spaces, and it's mostly white folks making over 100K. They want trails, and most of Houstonians are not, in Houston, that's not the demographic. And so like requiring any agency to be able to get public input in the management process so that what the people want is actually built there, whether it's like, for my family, we needed like multiple group camping sites in Yosemite. We didn't get it at the time. And so understanding that people connect to nature in different ways based on their culture and their background, and not just having this like very narrow, like John Muir style, like management of public lands. I think that's one thing. I think the second thing, and this is not directly connected to this expedition, but I would be remiss if I didn't say it for policy, is rematriation of land to Indigenous people, because we're all on stolen land. And there's, I think that federal government does not think Indigenous communities can actually manage their own lands, but I think we all need to be advocates for decolonizing public lands management.
I've never heard the word rematriation. I'm going to use that all the time now.
Well, repatriation is patriarchal. So.
I love that. I absolutely love that. You know, one of the questions that people keep asking, and I know that they've asked me, maybe they've asked you, are we going to go back? Are we going to go back to Summit Denali? Do we have to? I mean, is it necessary? Because I would go with all you guys in a second, but the question is, you know, can we, should we, what, do we need another seismic experience to move this conversation forward? And what do you think?
Tyree's already
Yeah, Tyree's already been back.
Yeah, well, I'd go back. I'd go back with the same group because there was just a lot of energy in that group.
Do we, I mean, I guess, you know, the real point is, you know, do we need another expedition Denali other than the fact that it would be a great adventure? What would be different? Because I think, Aparna, you started this conversation off with, you would have done it differently today than you would have done it back in 2013. If we were to do it again today, how would it be different?
I have a plan to stay just a little bit longer, just because I've been back again. So I would just dedicate a little bit more time, bring a little bit more food. But I think, I think to the point of just not changing anything, just to think that we had, I think it was 19 of us get to, 19, I don't even know how high we got. To get there safely, everyone was feeling really great, and being able to get down safely. And there was no, it was a really smooth trip for all of us. At least it seemed that way to me. And so from a logistics standpoint, from a health standpoint, from a emotional standpoint, I think that for me, it was a really perfect trip. It couldn't have been any better. And part of the reason why I didn't something the second time, because it just was not the same. It just didn't feel the same to me. And so I didn't have the same sense of community. I honestly didn't even stay as long the next time because it just was like, this doesn't feel as good. I just didn't have that same connection with everyone. And so I think the first trip and just the expedition itself just was really, it was very well done. Thanks to Aparna. But also the group, it just was a really great group. And even the field team, everyone. I don't know if back to the point of regrets, there was no regrets, but I also don't think that there's much we could have done differently in that circumstance.
But you all would have, this time, if we did it again, we would give Stephen, you'd get the spot, you'd get to talk to your kids. While you were on the mountain, Tyree, you would get to Instagram photos. I wouldn't have to be I was where all the stories went out with my lens. I'm not you. You all would be able to tell your own stories from the mountain if we do it again. And that was a regret for me.
Yeah, I think that would have changed things significantly. And I wonder, man, I wonder what sponsors think about this. The bag is halfway packed, man. I still got my stuff. I'm just saying.
I would want to do the Muldrow route, to be honest. I think that the impact that the West Buttress receives just from the amount of visitors. I know that it was the 100-year anniversary when we were there, but to see the impact that route is getting with so many people on it, I would encourage us to do the Muldrow. I'd probably stop halfway up through the marsh, but I think that the Muldrow would be the one way that I would do it again, and it would have to be with this group.
Yeah, that's the original way that Charlie Crenshaw did it. Rosemary, what about you?
Absolutely. I would love to go back and with these people. I could not agree more with like each of y'all beautiful folks here. Like the fact that we were able to create such a strong sense of community before going to the mountain just had a huge impact. And so I would love to have the opportunity to spend that time on the mountain with y'all again. And kind of upon how you had said of just having more of an opportunity for us to share the experience from our perspective, kind of going to that question of like, oh, does the world need like another expedition Denali or like monumental or like big events such as this? And I think that like yes and no. Ultimately, like yes, the world needs more just expeditions like this. Like maybe not. Do we need, you know, the same 19 people that were together there to get to the mountain again? Like that might necessarily not be the thing that contributes to the conversation. However, just us getting there, having that sense of community, getting onto the mountain, sharing our stories, continuing to have that ripple effect, like that has already and is currently just doing so much for this conversation of the outdoor industry as a whole, from us as Expedition Denali to all of these other people, just every person, everybody who is spending time in the outdoors, creating their story, creating their relationship, and sharing that story. And so while I think that that is the bigger picture need there, hell yes, I would want to get back on the mountain with y'all. So definitely also open. My bag's also packed. I got all my stuff together. DeBerry, I'm with you. You know, we're like halfway ready to go. Give us a date. I'm there.
Can I add one thing, James? I think that there was a really important concept that was central to Knowles, where Aparna was working, and sort of the backbone of most of this work, which was expedition behavior. And it really was, I think, it's showing up in the love that you see between the teammates here, but it really was the culture of deeply taking care of each other, actively, you know, looking out for each other. And I think that's the thing that really, you know, probably made the difference between our trip and the trip that Tyree was talking about. That just felt different, you know. And so, you know, I don't know that we necessarily need a Denali trip, although that'd be nice. But I think what it sounded like you were asking, you know, like what do we actually need, you know? And I think what we really could benefit from at this moment in our history in this country with everything that's going on, man, I just think about what the world would look like if everyone had that expedition behavior, if everyone in our communities had good EB and we were all working together towards a goal collaboratively and supporting each other. You know, I think that's really important and inspiring for people to understand. And it shouldn't be that you had to, you know, go away to this very far away place to encounter that. That's something that could translate to everybody in every place.
Up, and I'm curious to know, does anyone have any final parting words or thoughts they'd like to share with our audience? Takeaways, things that you've learned, things that you'd like to share, anything from anyone?
I have one last thing. I just want to go back to something that DeBerry said about just environment. I think it's just very relevant right now. It's just like how specifically people that I like am in community with view their environment, and that looks very different. And even to the point of policy and with our public lands, I just like we've been having conversations with Soul Track about just protecting and creating space for Black lives on public land, and how that looks like, although the public land that we are talking about right now may look a certain way or may be a certain environment that we're all kind of generally speaking about, but it's really important that policies and all of these things really do have or do work, or we're working in a way that is starting to really protect and like create warm space for us, because it is like one of those things where our lives are in jeopardy every day. Even just running or like walking down the street or going through local parks. And it's really hard for communities to feel like they can go out and adventure and be in these spaces because we're seeing a repeated act of terror on us. And so I think that it's really important that organizations and groups in these infinity spaces are all present because it does allow people to step into a place of comfort when we are going out into a very terrifying environment on a daily basis. And so I think that for me, I want to just close this conversation with that. Like, although we may be talking about a very general natural environment, but our environment in a whole is wherever we like exist every day. And unfortunately, sometimes that place for a lot of us can be very, very horrifying. And I think that just an experience like Expedition Denali kind of shows the value or the importance of community in a lot of these spaces, because I did feel safe. I did feel protected. You know, the second time I went on Denali, I was the only Black person yet again, and I didn't have that same sense of comfort or validation in a space that literally was surrounded around whiteness physically, but even by the names of the peaks, even by the people that were climbing. And so I just think that it's really important that we create space that does feel like it's for us, that it does feel like we are protected. We do have points of relativity. I just think that it's really important that we do create these experiences over and over again for people, because sometimes that can be very, very traumatizing and hard for people to come into. And these are like real experiences that I've heard from so many people within my community on a daily basis around why they haven't been able to go, 20 minutes outside of DC to a park, because, that just doesn't feel like a very safe space for them to exist. Because after hearing, the last 2 weeks, there's been at least 3 or 4 murders on Black people. And so just understanding how, our current, even the public space that we exist in, even in an urban environment, or maybe on the news, does have a very close connection to the spaces that we might care about in a natural environment as well. And so I just wanted to close with that. And thank you all for being a part of this.
Thank you. Spoken from as the youngest member of the expedition, apparently you learned a lot. Everybody, thank you so much for coming out for this little reunion. To everyone who came out online to watch the film, some of you for the very first time, some of you for the 10th, 15th, 20th time. It's always going to be available online. You can get it on iTunes. I want to take the time right now to thank our sponsors. The North Face and Yeti were kind enough to provide the underwriting for this event. We're also received the support and encouragement of the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I'm a proud member of the teaching staff. And I want everyone to take the time to express their love of the outdoors by making sure that you're doing it for other people, not just for yourselves. Okay, making sure that we protect and preserve these wild and scenic places for future generations so that we can all enjoy them, hopefully together. We're going to probably stay online for a little bit to say goodbye. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming out this evening. It is now 9:15 Central Time, a quarter after the hour wherever you are. But for now, we're going to say goodnight. And I hope you have nothing but great luck on all of your adventures. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll hopefully catch you again next time. Good night.